In the frigid waters of the North Atlantic, 3 Russian Borei-class nuclear submarines opened their launch tubes, simultaneously firing 120 Kalibr cruise missiles. They skimmed just over 60 feet above the water, streaking at nearly 600 miles per hour, each carrying a warhead 3 times more powerful than a Tomahawk missile. Their target, Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, a stronghold housing over $6 billion in stealth weaponry and nearly 1,200 service members. The entire U.S. defense system had only 58 seconds to react. The barrage of fire pierced through both Patriot PAC-3 and THAAD defenses, raining down on hangars, munition depots, radars, and flight control systems. An explosion obliterated an F-35 reserve, creating a fireball over 230 feet high. But this was only the beginning. Less than 18 hours later, B-2 and B-21 bombers silently departed their bases. GBU-57 bunker buster bombs wiped out the entire S-500 system in Murmansk. Over 120 Russian air defense specialists died, and communication with Moscow was severed. Meanwhile, U.S. carrier strike groups were closing in on the Norwegian Sea. Yet, even as the U.S. defense alert level rose to an unprecedented height since 9/11, the full-scale war didn't erupt. So, what prevented a nuclear storm from unleashing after these unprecedented precision strikes? Stay tuned. This isn't a story of war. It's a stark warning of how a high-tech conflict could swiftly descend into hell. If your heart skipped a beat reading about 120 Kalibr missiles skimming the water and slamming into a U.S. base, then hit like, share, and follow now, because that was just the opening shot. What's coming next will be bolder, more dangerous, and definitely not for the faint of heart. Sharks beneath the fog. At 4:17 in the morning, on June 29, 2025, 3 Russian Borei-class nuclear submarines, each over 550 feet long and carrying 40 cruise missiles, silently cut through the deep waters of the North Atlantic at a depth of 980 feet beneath the icy cold surface. They simultaneously opened their launch tubes. In less than 40 seconds, 120 Kalibr missiles shot out of the ocean, leaving plumes of steam and fiery trails in the darkness. Each missile stabilized its altitude at 65 feet above the water, accelerating to 600 miles per hour, skimming the surface like living blades, heading straight for the Western Hemisphere. Each warhead contained over 440 pounds of high explosives, programmed to strike different areas of a single target, Eglin Air Force Base, the largest U.S. Air Force base on land. As the missile volley entered the airspace over the North Atlantic, Norwegian radars began to flicker. Early warning stations in Greenland and Labrador only caught fleeting signals due to the extremely low flight altitude. But by 4:20, the first Kalibrs had passed the Bahamas and began approaching the Florida coast. Ground radars at Cocoa Beach Station identified a target spread nearly 30 miles wide. At 4:21, a chorus of sirens tore through the night at Eglin AFB. Red lights flashed along the hangars of F-35s, F-22s, and MQ-9 Reapers. Pilots, technicians, and security forces scrambled from their bunks, donning helmets and grabbing sidearms as they rushed to bomb shelters. The base was placed under DEFCON 2, an alert level only activated during wartime. Patriot PAC-3 MSE batteries positioned on the east side of the base began to raise their launchers. AN/MPQ-65 radar swept 360 degrees simultaneously. 18 miles to the north, a mobile Sky Sabre air defense station activated, its Giraffe 3D radar rotating continuously at 60 revolutions per minute. The Link 16 network connected both systems, coordinating with a nearby Marine Corps AN/TPS-80 radar. At 4:23, from the skies over the Gulf of Mexico, an E-3 Sentry transmitted in an alarm. Target count exceeds 100. Low flight altitude, likely Kalibr cruise missiles. At the base, 2 F-35As were urgently towed to a secondary runway. Pilots rushed into their cockpits as the ground still vibrated from the sirens and the roar of the fueling complex. At 4:24, the first wave of Kalibrs entered Florida airspace. Patriot launchers fired. Streaks of fire ripped across the dark sky. Sky Sabre also launched 6 interceptors from the edge of the forest near Thetford. The interceptors sliced into the air on V-shaped trajectories, colliding with 3 Kalibrs at an altitude of 100 feet, creating explosions as bright as suns in the night. At 4:25, 8 more Kalibrs were hit, falling into the Big Lagoon forest, leaving long burn marks and gray smoke rising from the grass. However, many continued to push through, weaving between radar gaps, disappearing and reappearing on screens like ghosts. At 4:26, the remaining 72 missiles bypassed the first interception ring. Some circled to avoid areas with defense systems, using low hills for radar concealment. Inside the base, a loudspeaker blared, "Everyone to Bunker 3, move now." Hangar doors automatically slammed shut, and fire suppression robots activated. At 4:27, piercing screeches erupted from the air. Kalibrs appeared like a swarm of iron bats, tearing through pine groves, hugging the highway near Valparaiso. Suburban residents, just waking up, saw their windows shatter, and fire alarms wailed like mad. At 4:28, the remaining 41 Kalibrs simultaneously slammed into Eglin Air Force Base like hungry wolves. The first two struck the MQ-9 UAV hangar, destroying the central control system. Another penetrated the roof of a fuel depot, creating a 650-foot fireball. Subsequent missiles collapsed runways, deforming 3 recently upgraded F-22s. One Kalibr slammed directly into the guided weapons testing complex, corrupting all research data for developing air-to-ground missiles. Another destroyed the data transmission station connected to NORAD. There were absolutely no fatalities thanks to robust bunkers, swift warnings, and disciplined response protocols. However, 26 people were injured, mainly due to shock waves and shattered glass. 4 fighter jets were severely damaged beyond repair. 2 UAV hangars burned to the ground. The base was temporarily paralyzed. At 4:30, black smoke billowed vertically over Florida. Military drones flying overhead transmitted images to the Pentagon gaping bomb craters, swirling smoke plumes, shredded runways. In Washington, the Southeast Command Duty officer simply said, quietly but firmly, "The battle has begun." Counterattack from the death machines. At 7:40 in the evening Eastern Time, on the same day Eglin Base was attacked, the Pentagon issued a full-scale counterattack order. On the giant screen at the command center in Arlington, an electronic map clearly displayed the flight paths of 5 stealth bombers. 3 B-2 Spirits took off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, while 2 B-21 Raiders departed runways in California. Each aircraft carried a GBU-57 MOP-heavy bunker buster bomb, the only type capable of penetrating deep through the concrete and reinforced steel of strategic command bunkers. In the dead of night, the formation flew over Canada, heading north in the foggy skies of Greenland. 6 KC-46 Pegasus tankers appeared from forward operating bases, successively refueling the bomber fleet in a semi-stealth state. In the cockpit, the pilots couldn't see their targets, but they knew everything awaited them beyond the Arctic Circle. Electronic reconnaissance systems began to deploy. 2 RQ-180s, stealth UAVs capable of deep reconnaissance, had been launched earlier that day from Alaska, along with scans from military satellites. They had created a 3-dimensional map of the entire Kola Peninsula, especially the locations of S-500 systems, fire control radars, and missile depots in Murmansk. The flight lasted 9 hours, circling over the North Pole. The stealth aircraft completely avoided NATO airspace to maintain absolute secrecy. As they entered the Barents Sea area, they descended, hugging the icy terrain, heading for a single target, the city of Murmansk headquarters of Russia's Northern Air Defense Command. At 4:51 in the morning the next day, 5 GBU-57 bombs sequentially dropped from an altitude of 36,000 feet. Within 10 seconds, the entire hill east of Murmansk, where the command bunker was located, shook violently. The S-500 air defense system immediately lost contact. A second strike penetrated directly into the missile depot less than 1.2 miles away, creating a chain reaction explosion that shook the ground like a magnitude 6 earthquake. The seismic shock spread to the underground radar stations behind it. Smoke plumes hundreds of feet high rose, blanketing the northern sky. Traffic was cut, and communication signals between Murmansk and Moscow were completely severed, according to initial estimates. Over 120 people died, mostly soldiers and military engineers, working at coordination centers. The entire defense network in the Murmansk-Karelia-Arkhangelsk region was paralyzed. NATO had not only retaliated, but had chosen the precise moment to strike at the heart of the Russian air defense system. From the command base in Germany, senior NATO commanders ordered a shift to Phase 2, Strategic preemptive strikes would continue, not stopping here. Russia pays the price for a misstep. From the morning of June 30th to midday on July 1st, the entire North Russian region descended into chaos. What was once a crucial defensive belt in Murmansk, Arkhangelsk, and Karelia began to fracture layer by layer. After the morning strike, local command stations lost contact with Moscow's Central Command. Radio transmissions were interrupted. Response orders didn't arrive in time, leaving combat units in a state of blind anticipation. At the Murmansk port, crews on the Beret and Yasin-class submarines were ordered to immediately evacuate the harbor. Without guidance signals, they activated their internal navigators and, one by one, brought their vessels out of the dock in disarray. Searchlights cut through the dense fog. Nuclear engines roared amidst burning containers. 3 Bore subs plunged into the Barents Sea, heading west, followed by escort ships that had lost connection. In Arkhangelsk, military transport ships ran aground during their retreat due to conflicting coordination orders. Warehouses lay dormant. Gas stations were abandoned. No one dared refuel. Supply convoys heading to Karelia turned back in vain as roads were blocked by their own rapid response units. Logistics across the board were severely disrupted. NATO seized the opportunity. Without any official designation, armored units from Germany accelerated their deployment. In Estonia, Latvia, and northern Norway, hundreds of Leopard 2A7 tanks, PZH-2000 self-propelled howitzers, and AN/TPQ-53 battlefield radars successively moved along strategic routes. No gunfire, just dozens of miles of vehicle columns stretching through forests and mountains. The Moscow financial market plummeted 18% in just 24 hours. Banks reported mass withdrawals. The ruble sharply depreciated, and lines stretched blocks long at ATMs. Western media showed images of Russian citizens clutching their children, crowded in subway stations, trying to leave northern cities. At the Kremlin, top generals held an emergency meeting throughout the night. One side pushed for a long-range counterattack to save national face. The other argued for opening negotiations if they didn't want to lose complete control of the north. The division within the leadership spread to battlefield commanders. Orders changed constantly, within the same hour, disorienting frontline units. The Northern Defense System, once considered a strong shield against NATO, now became a gaping rift. Remaining radars operated sporadically. High-altitude air defense systems were not rearmed. Air Force units at Olenia Airport were forced to cancel sorties due to a lack of guidance signals. Northern Russia, a once heavily guarded region, was now almost empty. The only question echoing among Western strategists now, where will the next blow come from? The risk of full-scale war. Less than 2 days after the Murmansk attack, the Russian Ministry of Defense issued an urgent order for the first time in over 30 years. Iskander-M missile units in Karelia were placed on high alert. Trucks carrying tactical nuclear missiles quietly moved through forests near the Finnish border, hidden under green camouflage netting. From the western mountains, 260 and 295 bombers took off on patrol, carrying long-range cruise missiles. Bore-class submarines, armed with Bulava missiles, were also put on combat readiness. Russia's nuclear triad was activated, ready to respond at the first sign of a threat. At the same time, in a secret command bunker near Moscow, the National Security Council held an emergency meeting. Images of Topol-M missile vehicles moving along village roads were broadcast on television. A clear warning to NATO and the Russian people, Moscow was ready to act. On the US side, the Pentagon raised its alert level to DEFCON 2, the highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. 2 aircraft carriers, the USS Gerald R. Ford and USS Harry S. Truman, moved into the Norwegian Sea, carrying fully armed FA-18 squadrons. EA-18G Growler reconnaissance aircraft and MQ-4C Triton drones continuously monitored the Karelia region and the Barents Sea. NATO also acted quickly. Armored units from Germany moved through Poland to Estonia and Latvia. Military airfields in Romania, Norway, and Lithuania opened temporary runways, transforming the Baltic region into a defense network. In Brussels and Ramstein, images from RQ-4 Global Hawk drones provided detailed information on Russian troop positions in Karelia. Northern European airspace was almost empty as international airports switched to emergency mode. The world stood on a dangerous precipice, but even as missiles were prepared, diplomats secretly began to move. From Washington, a delegation flew to Akureyri, Iceland, a former Cold War negotiation point. Simultaneously, another group traveled to Geneva to open a communication channel with Moscow. The meeting took place in secret, without flags or press. In a signal-proof basement in Northern Europe, a clear message was delivered. While modern technology can control the battlefield, even a small mistake could plunge the entire world into catastrophe. In just 72 hours, the world went from tension to the brink of war. It began when Russia launched Kalibr missiles from submarines, destroying Eglin Base in Florida. The US retaliated with air power, paralyzing Russia's northern defense system. Now, nuclear missile trucks moved slowly on village roads, tracked every step by US drones. Modern warfare doesn't require widespread destruction. It unfolds quietly, but its consequences are impossible to predict. All content above is simulated, hypothetical, strategic, analytical. It is not intended to incite violence, political bias, or provoke military action or war. The content is purely hypothetical simulation and personal analysis of potential scenarios. Any misinterpretations will not be accepted. We are not responsible for any interpretation or application of the video's content. Viewers should exercise their own judgment, verify information, and consume content selectively. Thank you very much for staying with us until the end. If you are a military enthusiast who enjoys analysis and hypothesizing, please stay with our channel. If you found this video interesting, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss any daily updates from us. Now, you can watch some of our latest and most popular videos currently on screen. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.